Hello, it's me, we're back, and we're going to be talking more Murray Gold Doctor Who music. This time we're going to be looking at some of Murray's villain themes for the show, specifically from the RTD1 era. If you've not already seen them, go and check out my other videos in this series where we've talked about some of Murray's Doctor themes and companion themes. But without further ado, let's get villainous. First used as more just incidental music for the end of the world, this motif returns in New Earth, and its title on the soundtrack release ties it to Cassandra specifically, so I'm going to treat this as her theme. It's a fun, kooky, mysterious little waltz. It's in 3/4 time, using piano and strings as the main voice, as you'd expect with a waltz, but also has this synth lead line over the top of that main melody, to give it that slightly futuristic feel. You've also got those warbling, rubbery, reflective synth sounds in the accompaniment that sound all elastic, stretching and springing back into shape, almost like a musical embodiment of Cassandra's physical form. It's a really fitting leitmotif for this character, taking a very classical type of tune with the waltz, associated with elegance and prestige, and then contorting it into a new alien shape. It almost feels like a piece of alien music doing an impression of a waltz, mirroring how Cassandra maintains that she is the last human, despite having completely transcended her humanity and becoming this abomination that she is. It's a small detail, but I've always loved those bubbling sound effects that you can hear on this track. It always makes me think of Cassandra's brain bubbling away in the tank, and feels strangely medical and biological, which are also ideas that I associate with Cassandra as a character. There's a sinister edge to the tune, I think helped by some of those accidentals in the melody, specifically the E and B naturals, which don't fit diatonically within the key of G minor, but also it's got this kind of bohemian kookiness to it too. On the soundtrack liner notes, Gold says Cassandra was a villain through and through, but the music that accompanied her into New Earth reflected her playful theatricality and her mixture of space age and vaudeville, which I think beautifully sums up this piece of music. I've seen some people refer to this as an early waltz version of The Doctor Forever, and whilst there are some basic similarities with the rhythm and melody, I don't think that this is the case. I personally hear them as being very different motifs, but what do you think? This tune explodes onto the scene. It's a real big, bombastic action motif. The timpani and that heavy sounding brass perfectly represent those great big green beasts. It's very percussive with this weighty sound. There's a bounciness to the bass with this double tresillo rhythm, dipping in and out of syncopation. It's a rhythm used a fair bit in a lot of 80s power rock and songs that are emulating that kind of sound. The rhythm gives the piece a kind of fun energy, but also a sense of frantic panic, heightened by those high strings and blaring horns, reminiscent of the crashing spaceship. And because of that, whenever I hear this theme, I immediately think of the big set piece of the Slitheen spaceship crashing into Big Ben. It's such an iconic image from that first series, and the score perfectly matches that scale and madness of what is being witnessed. Murray says this was his first chance to write a big traditional space adventure theme, as this two-parter was the second story that Gold worked on after Rose. One part I really like is this chromatic walk down from the E natural to the D in the melody line. The top note literally just walks downward a semitone at a time, but the interesting thing for me is how the notes underneath it form a different pattern, creating 3 distinct intervals to give each one a different feel in the harmony. First we get a C sharp and an E, a minor third, then a B and an E flat, a major third, then finally a G and a D, a perfect fifth. So we begin with this tension and then end on this stable, powerful sound. There's a variation of the theme used for Margaret in Boomtown, but it's much more stripped back. The tempo is slowed right down and it is played on a solo cor anglais.
He wants much, much more cor anglais,
emphasising her loneliness and isolation. It also crops up again in Love and Monsters when Elton is witnessing the Big Ben crash, and again in The Day of the Doctor when the TARDIS is airlifted by a unit, which doesn't seem to have any kind of thematic relevance, and I imagine was just chosen because it's a cool action cue to score the scene. Firstly, massive shout out to that eerie electronic sting that accompanies the reveal of the Metaltron in Dalek. That's the first musical motif we get for the Daleks in the modern series, and I love it. There's something really unsettling about that high-pitched, mechanical, dissonant whine as the lights come up and we hear the Doctor's screams for help. This little sting is incorporated into their more recognisable theme, but I think it deserves a special mention just for how iconic it is, and I associate it pretty much purely with that scene, and therefore this specific Dalek. That said, we do get a taste of the villain's main leitmotif in Dalek, just in a slightly different arrangement to the more recognisable one we hear in the series finale and future appearances. The main piece of instrumentation for the Daleks is a choir, which we might typically associate with the angelic and the graceful, but not this time, because this is a choir from the pits of hell, delivering a demonic Gregorian-esque chant. I mean, they're not really from the pits of hell, they're the Crouch End Festival chorus, and I'm sure they're lovely, but man can they make an ominous sound. Murray wanted the lower registers to sound monkish, and they were pitched lower to provide that darker, more foreboding sound. He also directed the choir to sound ritualistic and very deliberate on the beat, creating an almost robotic, inhuman quality. The piece seems to be somewhat inspired by Carl Orff's O Fortuna, or possibly John Williams' Duel of the Fates from The Phantom Menace. The iconic chanting actually consists of lyrics written in Hebrew slang, with Murray himself coming from a Jewish family. The lyrics are O Makore, Oh, what is happening? Ole Sota, ascending higher, which is exactly what the melody does, climbing up the scale in semitones, a tried and tested way of building tension in a piece of music. Ole Samdva, nothing much, and Korigeva, what's up, man? You might have noticed that other than ascending higher, none of these lyrics have any real relevance to the Daleks, with the others seemingly consisting of casual Hebrew slang and expressions. This is because Gold chose the lyrics for their phonetic and tonal qualities rather than their actual meaning. So, essentially, they don't mean anything, they just sound really cool. The harmonic rhythm in the opening chant is something to note as well. The harmonic rhythm being essentially at which point the chord changes. Here we get a really asymmetrical harmonic rhythm. It's essentially 6 counts of G, 2 counts of A flat, 4 counts of A, 2.5 of B flat, and 1.5 of C. Then we end on that full bar of 4 with that B major chord. The points at which we move up to the next chord aren't necessarily where we would expect. For example, if we had the chord changing on every bar, so every 4 counts, or sometimes at every half bar, every 2 counts, it would sound like this. The actual harmonic rhythm feels a lot more unpredictable, slightly juxtaposing that deliberate rhythm and on-the-beat nature that Gold wanted, which feels really apt for the Daleks. Because yeah, they're focused and logical and single-minded, but they're also unpredictable, and will find creative ways to achieve their goal. Then we get this little 3-note phrase, which outlines a G minor chord, but ending on this B flat, which is the 7th of the key, which just leaves us hanging with that sense of dread. I think it's impressive that this incredibly theatrical and melodramatic theme never feels over the top or trite, and instead perfectly depicts the horror of the Doctor seeing that fleet of Daleks for the first time at the end of Bad Wolf. Even more impressive is the fact that the choir used in the finished cut of Dalek actually isn't a choir at all. It's actually just Murray Gold himself, just with loads of layered takes, and they didn't mean to use that version. It was meant to be the full choir, but they accidentally used this one. It seems that for the finale onwards, the actual recordings of the choir were used instead of Murray's demo, which is ironically quite fitting. The story that features just the one Dalek is the one where we only have Murray's vocals, whereas the finale gives us an entire fleet of them, and that's when we get the full choir. What I think of as the Daleks' leitmotif is this melody. I always associate this particular part with their cliffhanger reveal in the end of Army of Ghosts. It somehow feels both playful and menacing, perhaps because it has that almost nursery rhyme feel to it. I mean, listen to how it sounds in a major key. It's somehow simultaneously a great little sing-song melody that is absolutely terrifying. This piece would appear in every Dalek story of the first Russell T Davies era, but sadly it seems that Gold moved away from it once we got into the Moffat era. But this is not the only RTD1 Dalek theme. For their return in Series 3, the Daleks get a new theme specific to that story, titled Evolution of the Daleks. It definitely shares some traits with their main theme, namely that dark choir that they have now become synonymous with in Murray's scores, chanting more Hebrew verses. But for this track, we've got a much more prominent orchestral accompaniment, with strong lines for the strings, brass and timpani. This results in a kind of dark, brooding, marching rhythm, with piercing staccato stabs from the brass and strings that create an almost syncopated rhythmic feel. But in a way, it almost feels like the soundtrack to some kind of twisted dance that would be a part of an occult ritual. I don't know, this one feels very Danny Elfman. This slower march-like version only features a couple of times in the episodes. It was instead often played at a much faster tempo and combined with one of Gold's big action motifs written for this series, All the Strange Creatures, giving it a much more chaotic feel. You can hear this in the previously recap at the beginning of part 2. Interestingly, this piece first appears in the episode before the Dalek two-parter, Gridlock. It also pops up in the next two Dalek stories in Journey's End and Victory of the Daleks. But strangely, also in the post-title sequence for The Time of Angels. The Dark and Endless Dalek Night is a really cool title. It is also the main motif used for the Series 4 finale, The Stolen Earth and Journey's End, which sees the explosive return of the Daleks, their creator Davros, and just about anyone that Chris Eccleston and David Tennant's Doctors had even brushed past in the street over the last 4 years. In the soundtrack album's liner notes, Gold describes this theme as a Dalek march, adopting a slow, steady rhythm for the first section. We get more choral chanting, this time being in Latin, just so it sounds even more like Gregorian monks, and then moving back to the Hebrew, as with the previous Dalek themes. We also get that climb up the minor scale, harkening back to Bach. This is another piece that crops up in later episodes in one of the battle sequences from The Day of the Doctor. And the Skaro reveal in The Magician's Apprentice. After the first series of the revival brought back the Daleks, it was only natural that Series 2 would bring back the Doctor's other most iconic foes, the Cybermen. And just as Gold gave the Daleks an epic theme, the Cybermen got one to match. The track opens with this ominous brass line. And I'm going to say it, I think this motif is more iconic than the Daleks. I don't necessarily think the theme as a whole is better, although there's definitely an argument for that, but just as a recognisable little melody, to me, these 6 notes are the sound of the Cybermen. The 6 notes of the Cybermen theme can't really be separated from the clump of their marching in formation. This, as much as the music, signalled their ominous advance. Nevertheless, those 6 notes do underscore much of the Cybermen on screen in Tom McRae's brilliant 2-parter.
The musical theme needed to be simple because it was always going to fit under footsteps.
The melody itself basically just outlines the first 5 notes of the F minor scale. The orchestral arrangement for this piece is almost operatic, with all of those strings playing that main line. It immediately establishes this sense of dread that is inherent to the Cybermen. That use of the low trombone somehow seems to connote the metal skin of the creatures. We then venture into horror music as we linger on eerie strings, descending in semitones before returning to the main melody, this time with a more action-focused accompaniment, as though depicting the Cybermen rising to power. Finally, we get this great big action theme in 5/4 time, the odd time signature creating this almost frantic, panicked feeling to the music. Interestingly, for the longest time, I'd completely missed that this section is in 5/4. I think in part because the melody still only uses 4 notes or chords, playing with the note length and using dotted quavers for the first 2 chords in the bar, whilst using regular quavers for the second 2, meaning that the second chord doesn't fall on the downbeat, which I think really gives it that sense of momentum. Here's what it might sound like if the chords were played on every beat of the bar. See how the original feels less rigid, more expressive, almost more threatening. This theme pops up in every RTD1 and Moffat era Cyberman episode, plus their appearances in the Pandorica Opens and The Time of the Doctor, as well as a couple of unrelated stories. However, this does mean that the Cybermen don't really get any new themes, more just variations on the original. It's not until Segan Akinola takes over as composer that they get a new theme. I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing. It's just gone on to make those 6 notes even more iconic. In 2007, Stephen Moffat introduced us to a new monster, and perhaps the only one that could actually rival the iconic status of the Daleks and Cybermen in popular culture, the Weeping Angels. Now, the Weeping Angels don't really have a theme as such, it's more of a sound. In all of their stories, they're accompanied by high pizzicato strings, often distorted or slightly out of tune to create that tension and unsettling atmosphere. In Blink, we get this repeated motif almost every time an angel is shown on screen during the first half of the story. In The Time of Angels and Flesh and Stone, we get these dissonant string stabs over a bed of shifting ambient soundscapes, which sounds almost like water trickling in the caves. And again, in the track Little Angels from The Angels Take Manhattan, we get these sliding strings. I really love that solo oboe piece. Solo oboe. Sorry. I really love that solo oboe piece used in Blink, but I associate that more with the episode than the angels themselves. So I'd be interested to know if anyone could point to a particular leitmotif for them. What is the angels' theme? Series 3 brought back everyone's favourite frenemy of the Doctor, the Master. And of course, as is now tradition for the big bad of the series, he gets his very own theme, the Master Vainglorious. Starting with a threatening bass line, we get little hints at that triplet rhythm that reflects the drumming in the Master's head. The droning D note in the bass with the G sharp for the melody, although there's not much of a melody, it's more of just a rhythmic thing played on a tuned instrument, creates an interval of a tritone.
It's called the Devil's Chord.
Essentially, a tritone is an interval consisting of 3 whole tones or 6 semitones, meaning it is the furthest distance that 2 notes can be from one another harmonically. As soon as you go 1 note up, which in this example would be an A, although we're further up the piano from the D note that we're playing, it's only 5 semitones away from the next D on the keyboard. So this is what creates this dissonance and sense of unease, because these are 2 notes that shouldn't be played together. We soon jump into some warped electronica, with distorted synth lines that seem to portray the unpredictability and insanity of this psychopathic Time Lord. Overlaid on top of that is that dizzying string line, going back and forth over 4 notes as we stay on that low B note in the bass line. Then we get these rich, powerful chords, reminiscent of John Williams' main theme for Star Wars. The first time this motif appears is in the closing moments of 42, where we see Saxon's people listening in on Francine's phone call with Martha. Then, of course, it features prominently in the finale of Series 3, and in both future appearances of Johnson's Master. It can be heard briefly in Dark Water as a musical hint to the identity of Missy, and Sagan Akinola pays homage to it in Spyfall. More recently, it was incorporated into the War Games in colour as a way of indicating the long-held fan theory that the War Chief is in fact an incarnation of the Master. And fans also spotted that dizzying string motif, now a brass line, pop up at the end of The Legend of Ruby Sunday during the sequence of Sutek's reveal. We'll come back to Murray's other Master theme, or more accurately, Mistress theme, next time, but a quick mention here to the track YANA because, oh, I love this piece of music. It has this beautiful, almost tribal section with wailing vocals and African-inspired samba-esque percussion, which feels like a potential nod to Peter Howell's motif for the Ainley Master in Planet of Fire. I just really like that track. It's so good. 2008 saw the return of the potato-headed warriors, the Sontarans. Unfortunately, they never got a dedicated theme released on the Series 4 soundtrack. In fact, the only piece of music from the Sontaran Stratagem and the Poison Sky is the updated unit theme, which is a real shame because this Sontaran theme is an absolute banger. We open with a fast, almost random sounding burst of chords, with some augmented thirds and fifths in the intervals for some cool, almost atonal sounds. There's some real Schoenberg vibes to this opening. Right from the beginning, we're launched into this charging tempo of around 185 BPM. This isn't the theme for the Sontarans drawing up their battle plans. This is the sound of them launching their attack. The top brass line outlines this C diminished 7 chord, which is beautifully crunchy, as it's essentially just 2 tritones stacked on top of each other.
It's called the Devil's Chord.
But when played as separate notes in a melody, it really highlights that chaos of the Sontaran attack on the unit bass. The inclusion of the brass in the instrumentation here obviously has connotations of military and war, but whereas we might typically think of that sound as maybe quite sombre and drawn out melodies you might hear at a military parade or remembrance service, here we have the contrast of this frenetic staccato melody depicting the chaos of war and the Sontarans' glee and enjoyment of it. This motif has a very percussive quality to it, and paired with the brass it sounds really like it's spurring the Sontarans on into battle. Similarly, I like that the core element of the motif is essentially just the repeated brass line, which again feels almost like a musical war cry for the villains. Unfortunately, this theme doesn't really crop up again, possibly because we won't get a proper Sontaran story again until War of the Sontarans. But like I said, it's a banger, so we're talking about it here. As previously mentioned, the other big returning villain for Series 4 was Davros, making his debut in the modern series alongside his creations in the Stolen Earth, and for his theme, Gold delves straight into the realm of horror. We begin with these distorted, gated synths that sound as if they're echoing through the shadows of the Crucible. We get some eerie, dissonant strings on a bed of low piano bass drone, before we get notes from the top end of the piano that create this sound of tinkering, like Davros's twisted experiments, punctuated by these cymbal hits on the offbeat that sound more like a bit of scrap metal, like someone is building something. The piano gets more frenzied with its dissonant top notes, creating something unnatural and obscene, as the strings and the rest of the accompaniment underneath it grow and swell, as if dynamically building towards his reveal. This isn't so much a recurring theme as it only features in the Series 4 finale, at least as far as I could tell, but I think it's a really great little motif, so it deserves a mention. And that brings us to the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed, please give it a like, share, subscribe, all of that stuff. If you'd like to support me any further, I do have a Ko-fi which you can donate to. I also have a Patreon for my podcast, which I host with my friend Kat. It's called the Says Who Podcast. We talk all things Doctor Who, reviews, news, interviews, things that don't rhyme. And over on our Patreon, we have all of that, plus a load more bonus bits and pieces. But thanks very much for watching, and hopefully I'll catch you again soon. Alright, cheers, bye.